The human engineer repaired a crashed starship. Inside was the alien queen's missing daughter. The debris field around Doral Station had a smell, which made no sense, because vacuum doesn't carry smell, and the suit recyclers were supposed to filter out everything except the faint mineral tang of recycled oxygen. But Lucas swore he could smell rust anyway, every time he drifted past a wreck old enough to have given up. He figured it was psychological. 2 years of doing this kind of work taught you to expect a certain odor when something had been dead a long time, and your brain just supplied it whether the molecules were there or not. The wreck currently filling his viewport had definitely been dead a long time. Catalogued as routine, Pym said, in the flat, unbothered voice it used for everything, including the time it had announced a hull breach with the same enthusiasm as a lunch reminder. Pym was Lucas's cargo drone, technically a Mark 9 utility unit, though Lucas had long since stopped thinking of it as a unit and started thinking of it as the world's most condescending coworker. Flagged unremarkable. Origin unconfirmed. Estimated salvage value low. I would like to register a formal complaint that we are doing this instead of the Havorson contract, which paid better and did not require me to float next to a corpse. It's not a corpse, it's a wreck. It is shaped like a tomb, Lucas. Most ships are shaped like tombs if you squint. I am not squinting. I do not have eyes that squint. That is a human failing you are projecting onto me. Lucas let that one go, mostly because Pym wasn't wrong about the shape, and partly because 3 days of staring at this particular hull had given him plenty of time to notice things he didn't love noticing. The ship, if you could call it a ship anymore, rather than the educated guess of one, sat tilted at an angle that suggested it hadn't so much crashed as been allowed to drift into whatever debris had eventually stopped it, accumulating junk and ice, and the slow, patient erosion of micrometeorites, until it looked less like a vessel, and more like something the field had grown around. The registry data was almost insultingly thin. No transponder ID that resolved to anything. No flight plan on file. No distress call logged anywhere in Doral's archives, which was unusual, because even the worst, most catastrophic failures tended to scream on their way down. This one had apparently died quietly, which in Lucas's experience was almost always worse than the loud kind. He'd taken the job because it paid reasonably, and because reasonable was about all he had energy for these days. Salvage work on the edge of a debris field wasn't glamorous, and he'd long since stopped expecting it to be. Content, instead, with the small, specific satisfaction of taking something broken and making it slightly less broken. He liked systems. He liked the moment when a circuit that had been silent for years coughed back to life under his hands, sluggish and confused but undeniably awake. It was, he privately thought, the closest thing he had to a religious experience, though he would never say that out loud where Pym could file it away for future mockery. Structural integrity report, he said, mostly to keep his hands busy while his brain caught up with the readouts. Tell me something I don't already hate. Hull plating compromised across 40% of surface area. Internal bulkheads largely intact, which is unusual given the plating damage, and which I do not have a satisfying explanation for. Power signature. Minimal, intermittent, localized to a single compartment near what I am guessing is the aft section, though the architecture does not match any registered hull class in my database. That last part caught his attention in a way the rest hadn't. Unregistered hull class. Correct, I have checked twice. I do not enjoy being wrong, so I checked a third time out of spite. The design language is not human. It is not any of the 7 non-human design languages I have on file, either. It is its own thing, Lucas, doing its own thing, and I find that deeply suspicious. Everything's deeply suspicious to you. You once called a vending machine deeply suspicious. The vending machine dispensed the wrong snack. That is grounds for suspicion in any civilized society. Lucas snorted, then maneuvered closer, his suit thrusters giving off the soft, almost embarrassed cough they always did on cold restarts, like the machinery itself was self-conscious about being woken up. The wreck loomed larger in his viewport, its hull a patchwork of corrosion and old scarring, and the closer he got, the less it looked like wreckage and the more it looked like something that had been built with intention before whatever happened to it had happened. There was a strange elegance buried under the damage, curved lines where human engineering would have gone for blunt right angles, plating that overlapped in a way that almost looked organic, like scales, if scales were something an engineer had designed rather than evolution. "Okay," he said, "I take it back. This is not unremarkable. I would like that noted in the log for when I am eventually vindicated." Noted. He drifted along the hull, running a gloved hand over a seam that practically hummed under his palm, the kind of low resonance that meant something inside was still, against all odds, drawing power. "There's something still alive in here. The ship or the something. Don't know yet. I am formally requesting you find out the safe way. The way where we scan first and cut second, rather than your usual method, which is cutting first and asking questions of whatever crawls out." That only happened once. It happened twice. I have it on file. I can replay the audio if you'd like to relive it. "I would not like that." He ran the scan anyway, partly to placate Pym and partly because 3 days of crawling over a wreck had taught him not to skip steps just because his curiosity was already 3 steps ahead of his caution. The readout came back strange in a way that made him frown behind his visor. A single sealed compartment, small, buried deep in what should have been the most damaged section of the ship and somehow wasn't, its systems running on a power signature so faint it barely registered, except that faint or not, it was stable. Not failing, not flickering. Stable like something had been very carefully, very deliberately keeping it that way for longer than any standard battery cell should have allowed. "That's not a power cell signature," Lucas said slowly. "No," Pym agreed, and for once it didn't sound dry or unbothered. It sounded, if a drone's voice could sound anything, almost careful. "It is a life support signature. Lucas, there's something keeping that compartment alive." He floated there for a long moment, hands still resting against the hull, feeling the faint hum travel up through his glove, and thought about all the routine, unremarkable jobs he'd taken, because the pay was reasonable and the work was straightforward, and how none of them, not one, had ever made the back of his neck prickle the way this one suddenly did. "Cut it open," he said. "I would like to formally state for the record that I find this decision reckless, premature, and exactly the kind of thing that gets people written about in cautionary tales." "Cut it open, Pym." "Cutting it open, Lucas," Pym said, with the particular put-upon sigh of a machine that had given its honest opinion and been ignored anyway, and the cutting laser flared to life with a soft, patient whine, beginning its slow work through 2 years of silence toward whatever, or whoever, had survived inside it. The cutting laser took 11 minutes to work through the compartment's outer seal, which Lucas spent counting his own heartbeats and trying not to think too hard about what 11 minutes was long enough for things to do, inside a sealed box in the dark, if they were awake and aware and counting along with him. Pym filled the silence the way Pym filled most silences, with commentary nobody had asked for. "I am detecting elevated heart rate," it said. "Yours, not the compartment's. The compartment does not have a heart rate. It has a power signature, which I have already told you about at length. Thank you for the update." "You're welcome. I am also detecting that your hands are shaking slightly, which is interesting, because you usually only shake like that around tax season." "I don't shake around tax season." "You absolutely do. I have footage." "You don't have footage, you have telemetry." "I have footage of telemetry, which is functionally the same thing and considerably more embarrassing for you." The laser finished its seam with a soft hiss, and the outer plate shuddered, then folded inward with a groan like something exhaling after holding its breath for longer than it should have. Lucas braced himself against the hull, one hand on his cutting tool and the other hovering uselessly near a sidearm. he had never once used on a salvage job, and sincerely hoped he wasn't about to start using now, and watched as the compartment's interior came into view through a haze of vented atmosphere that crystallized instantly into a fine, glittering fog. It was smaller than he'd expected. A single chamber, barely larger than an escape pod, lined with instrumentation he didn't recognize and didn't have time to admire, because in the center of it, suspended in a kind of gel-cushioned frame that looked equal parts medical and improvised, was a woman. "Oh," Pym said, in the tone of a machine recalibrating several assumptions at once. "That is not what I expected to find." "What did you expect to find? Cargo, or a very small, very angry animal?" "I had a whole theory about smugglers." "You always have a theory about smugglers." "It is usually correct." Lucas didn't answer that, mostly because he was too busy staring. The woman's eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in slow, shallow movements that suggested she was alive in the most technical and tenuous sense of the word. And her skin had the gray, papery look of someone who'd been rationing far more than oxygen. Her ears were the first thing that truly stopped him, long and gently pointed, tapering well past where a human ear would have given up and stopped, and he found himself staring at them with the specific, embarrassed fascination of a man trying very hard not to stare and failing completely. "Pym," he said carefully, "please tell me those are prosthetic." "They are not prosthetic. I am reading no synthetic material in that area at all." "Congratulations, Lucas, you have found a non-human." "I didn't find a non-human. I found a tomb. You said it yourself." "I said it was shaped like a tomb. I did not anticipate it would have someone inside it. I would like it noted that I am almost as surprised as you are, which for me is a significant emotional event." "You don't have emotions." "I have something. We can argue semantics later. Right now I would strongly suggest you stop staring at her ears and start checking if she's dying, because the second thing seems more urgent than the first." That landed like a bucket of cold water, and Lucas snapped back into motion, running the handheld scanner over her with hands that were, infuriatingly, still shaking, though he decided not to give Pym the satisfaction of mentioning it. The readout came back in a jumble of unfamiliar baselines, vitals that didn't match anything in his medical database, until Pym quietly overlaid an estimate built from general principles rather than precise data. The kind of educated guess a drone made when it didn't want to admit it was guessing. "She's alive," Pym said. "Barely. Whatever was keeping that compartment stable was keeping her stable too. I believe what you're looking at is something closer to a medically induced stasis than ordinary unconsciousness. Self-administered, possibly. The systems around her don't look factory standard. They look adjusted, tinkered with." "Tinkered with how?" "The way you tinker with things, Lucas. Badly, but with conviction, and somehow it works anyway." He didn't have time to be offended by that, because the woman's eyes opened. It happened slowly, the way waking happens when a body has spent who knew how long convincing itself that waking wasn't an option, her eyelids fluttering with the kind of effort that looked less like alertness, and more like sheer stubbornness overriding every system telling her to stay down. Her eyes found him immediately, dark and unfocused, but locked on with an intensity that suggested whatever was left of her was using every available resource to make sure this moment counted. "Hey," Lucas said, which was, in retrospect, possibly the least useful thing a person had ever said to someone they just cut out of a 2-year-old tomb. "Hey, you're okay. I've got you." I'm a salvager. I'm not going to hurt you, I'm just." "Articulate," Pym murmured, "truly a masterclass." "Shut up, Pym." The woman's mouth moved, dry and cracked, and it took her 2 attempts to produce sound that resolved into words rather than breath. "Who?" she managed, then stopped, gathering whatever was left of her strength like someone scraping together loose change. "Who are you?" "Lucas," he said. "I'm a salvager, found your ship out here. You've been out here a long time, I think." "Do you know how long?" She didn't answer that, not directly. her gaze sliding past him toward the ruined compartment around her with an expression that wasn't confusion so much as quiet, exhausted confirmation, as though some private bet she'd made with herself had finally come due. "It held," she said, mostly to herself. "I wasn't sure it would hold." "What held?" "The stasis frame. I built it from the medical bay parts. It wasn't—" She stopped again, breathing hard, and Lucas had the distinct sense of watching someone budget the very last of their energy with the precision of an accountant facing an audit. "It wasn't supposed to last this long. I didn't think anyone would find me this long." "Well," Pym offered, in the tone of a machine trying, against its nature, to be comforting. "For what it's worth, finding you was largely an accident. The contract was rated unremarkable, and my colleague here almost didn't bother investigating the power signature at all. So if it helps, the universe runs on incompetence as much as design." "Pym, I am attempting levity. The humans do this when situations are tense. I am told it helps." Astonishingly, something that might have been the ghost of a laugh moved through the woman's cracked lips, brief and involuntary, gone almost as soon as it arrived. But Lucas caught it, and something in his chest loosened slightly at the sight of it. "Your drone has a personality disorder," she said. "He's working on it." "I do not have a disorder," Pym said. "I have character asterisk." "What's your name?" Lucas asked, gently, the way you'd ask someone standing at the very edge of something because she so clearly was. "Can you tell me your name?" She looked at him for a long moment, dark eyes steady despite everything her body was clearly screaming at her to stop, to rest, to finally let go of the 2 years of careful, deliberate effort that had kept her alive in a sealed box at the edge of nowhere. And when she spoke, her voice was quiet but entirely, deliberately clear, as though she understood exactly what weight the name would carry once it left her mouth. "Stella," she said, tell them I'm alive. Tell them Stella's alive." And then, her strength finally, fully spent, she let her eyes close again, and Lucas was left floating in the wreckage of a ship that didn't match any registry, holding a scanner full of readings he didn't understand, next to a woman with ears that didn't belong to any species he knew, with absolutely no idea that the name she'd just given him was about to upend every quiet, unremarkable thing about his life. Doral Station's medical bay had the specific, sterile hum of a place designed to make you feel safe by making you feel nothing at all. Every surface scrubbed to a clinical white, every sound dampened by panels that absorbed footsteps like the room itself was holding its breath. Lucas had been pacing in it for the better part of 3 hours, which Pym had taken to logging with increasing precision. "That's lap 41, Pym said. "I started counting at lap 10 because I assumed you'd stop. You did not stop." "I'm not pacing. You are very specifically pacing. There is a worn patch forming in the floor tile. I have photographic evidence." "You don't have photographic evidence of a floor tile." "I have photographic evidence of everything, Lucas. That is the entire function of my optical sensors. Please keep up." He didn't have a good comeback for that, mostly because his attention kept sliding past the conversation entirely and landing on the observation window, beyond which Stella lay tethered to a dozen monitoring lines, her vitals scrolling across a display in numbers that meant nothing to him, but that the station's chief medic kept reading with the particular furrowed concentration of someone double-checking math they were fairly sure was wrong. She hadn't woken again. The medics had been careful about that, deliberately easing her deeper into something more stable than the stasis she'd improvised herself, the kind of caution that came from not entirely understanding what they were dealing with and not wanting to make it worse through enthusiasm. "Her biology is strange," the medic, a tired woman named Priya, had told him an hour ago, peeling off a glove with the particular weariness of someone who'd spent her shift discovering new ways to be confused. Strange good, mostly. Whatever she did to that stasis frame, it kept her cellular degradation to almost nothing. I've seen 2-week medical comas do more damage than 2 years did to her. I don't know if that's her physiology or her engineering, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out by trial and error. So she'll be okay. She'll be okay. She'll also probably wake up furious, because that's usually how it goes with the ones who fight that hard to survive. People who claw their way through something tend to wake up with opinions about it. Lucas had absorbed that piece of information the way he absorbed most things lately, which was badly. His brain too busy spinning through the same loop it had been spinning through since the name left her cracked lips in that ruined compartment. He'd done what she asked. He'd reported it through the proper channels, the way you reported any salvage find with a survivor attached, expecting paperwork, maybe a follow-up call from whatever registry handled missing persons in this sector. He had not expected the response he got, which had arrived within 40 minutes, which for any bureaucratic process Lucas had ever encountered was less a response time and more a small miracle. "Play it again," he said. "I have played it 4 times, Pym said. "I am beginning to suspect you enjoy the sound of your own impending doom. Just play it." Pym sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a machine that had opinions about being treated like a jukebox, and the message replayed through the small speaker clipped to Lucas's collar. A clipped, formal voice belonging to someone identifying themselves only as a registry coordinator, informing him that the name Stella, cross-referenced against a flagged missing persons file that had apparently been quietly active for 2 years, had returned an immediate, unambiguous match, and that all further information regarding the survivor's location and condition was to be considered priority and would be relayed upward through appropriate channels without delay. "Appropriate channels," Lucas repeated. "What does that mean?" "I looked into it," Pym said, and something in its tone shifted, the dry sarcasm thinning out into something almost apologetic, which from Pym was its own kind of alarming. "Lucas, I cross-referenced the flagged file against public diplomatic records. I would like to prepare you, gently, the way a friend would. You're not my friend, you're a drone. I am your friend who happens to be a drone, and I am going to need you to sit down for this." "I'm not sitting down." "Then I am going to need you to brace against something, because the missing persons file in question belongs to House Marin. Specifically, it belongs to the only daughter of Queen Vivian, ruler of the Marin Compact, who has, according to public record, been engaged in an unofficial but extremely well-funded 2-year search for her missing child, conducted with a level of quiet, simmering fury that several news outlets have described, and I am quoting directly here, as the diplomatic equivalent of a held breath." Lucas stood very still. "I would like to reiterate," Pym continued, "that you took this job because the pay was reasonable. I'm aware. I would also like to point out that I called this a tomb on day 1, and you told me everything is shaped like a tomb if you squint, and I think, in retrospect, that this particular tomb has turned out to be considerably more significant than most. You're enjoying this. I am experiencing something adjacent to enjoyment, yes. It is rare that I get to be right and devastating at the same time." Lucas dropped into the chair behind him, the one he'd been studiously avoiding for 3 hours of pacing, and stared through the observation window at the woman lying motionless on the other side of it, with her long, pointed ears and her dry, cracked, defiant voice insisting she'd survived 2 years in a tomb she'd built with her own hands rather than risk being found by the wrong people, and felt the full, slow-dawning weight of what he'd actually cut his way into. "She's a princess," he said. "She is, by all available records, the princess, singular, the only one, which, given the news coverage I am currently reading, makes her rather more important than the average princess, if such a ranking exists. I made a joke about you having a personality disorder in front of her. I noted that. I have it filed under things to never let you live down. Pym, I'm also obligated to inform you," Pym said, in the careful, deliberate tone of a machine delivering news it knew would land badly, that the registry coordinator's message included a secondary notice, received approximately 6 minutes ago, that I had been holding back because I wanted you sitting down first, and which I will now relay in full. Queen Vivian has personally authorized immediate travel to this station, departing within the hour, citing, and again, I am quoting, matters of the highest possible priority. Estimated arrival is 14 hours from now. The medical bay's sterile hum suddenly felt considerably less soothing. 14 hours, Lucas repeated. 14 hours, Pym confirmed. Which gives you 14 hours to prepare a wardrobe more dignified than the one you are currently wearing, which I believe has a coffee stain on it from this morning, and possibly also to prepare an explanation for how exactly a man on an unremarkable salvage contract ended up being the one to find a queen's missing daughter before her entire search fleet managed it in 2 years. I don't have an explanation. Then I would suggest you develop one quickly. Because in my experience, queens do not enjoy waiting for answers, and I suspect you are about to learn that lesson personally in approximately 14 hours, give or take the time it takes her shuttle to dock. Lucas looked through the window one more time at Stella, still and pale and breathing slow, steady breaths that had nearly stopped entirely 2 years and an unimaginable distance ago, and felt something settle in his chest that wasn't quite dread and wasn't quite anything else he had a name for either. The particular vertigo of a quiet life tipping, without warning or consent, towards something enormously larger than it had ever intended to be. 14 hours turned out to be exactly enough time for Lucas to ruin 3 shirts, reorganize his quarters twice, and develop a deeply unhelpful theory that Queen Vivian would somehow be able to tell, just by looking at him, that he'd made a personality disorder joke in front of her daughter while the woman was still half-conscious. "You are spiraling," Pym observed, watching him fold a shirt for the 4th time with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for studying a malfunctioning engine. I would like to note that spiraling is not a productive use of the remaining 90 minutes. I'm not spiraling, I'm being thorough. You ironed a shirt and then put coffee on it, and then ironed a different shirt and put coffee on that one too. That is not thoroughness, Lucas. That is a pattern, and patterns concern me. He didn't get the chance to argue, because that was the moment Doral Station's docking alert chimed through every speaker in the corridor, polite and understated in a way that felt almost insulting given what it was actually announcing. And Lucas abandoned the shirt entirely and went to go stand somewhere that wasn't his quarters, because apparently meeting a queen in his quarters felt worse than meeting her literally anywhere else in the universe. The arrival itself did not go the way he'd pictured it. He'd pictured something stately, something with a slow, deliberate grandeur, the kind of arrival sequence that diplomatic shuttles were presumably designed for, gliding into the docking bay with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once had to wait for anything in her life. What actually happened was that the Marin Compact's diplomatic shuttle, easily the most elegant vessel Doral Station had hosted in years, clipped the edge of a cargo crane on final approach with a screech of metal that echoed through 3 decks. The crane operator's panicked apology crackling over the comms almost immediately afterward. "I am so sorry, that wasn't supposed to be there. I swear it wasn't supposed to be there." "It is fine," came a voice through the same comm channel, dry, controlled, and entirely unbothered, in a tone that suggested its owner had weathered considerably worse indignities than a clipped crane. "We will discuss station clearance procedures later. For now, please open the bay." "That," Pym said, "is either remarkable composure or a queen who has simply run out of patience for being surprised by anything. Could be both." "It is almost certainly both." The shuttle docked, somewhat more carefully the second time, and the boarding ramp descended with a hiss that felt, to Lucas, considerably louder than it probably actually was. Queen Vivian emerged first, and she was not what he'd pictured either, not towering, not draped in the kind of ceremonial weight he'd half expected, but a woman of average height with the same long, pointed ears as her daughter, and an expression that managed to convey exhaustion, hope, and barely restrained fury all at once, like 3 weather systems trying to occupy the same sky. Where, she said without preamble, without greeting, the single word carrying the weight of 2 years behind it, is my daughter. Medical Bay, Your Majesty, Lucas managed. And then, because his mouth apparently operated independently of his better judgment under pressure, added, she's stable. She's going to be okay. Also, I'm sorry about the crane. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, the kind of assessing look that made Lucas feel approximately the size of the coffee stain currently soaking into his second-best shirt. And then, unexpectedly, something in her face cracked, not into composure exactly, but into something almost wry. The crane was not your doing. No, but I felt like someone should apologize for it, and the operator already used up his apology, so. He did use it up rather thoroughly, Vivian agreed, and for one disorienting second, Lucas thought he saw, in the tired curve of her mouth, exactly where Stella had learned that particular dry, unimpressed humor. Take me to her. Now, apologies later if apologies remain necessary. The walk to the medical bay happened mostly in silence, Vivian's advisors trailing a respectful distance behind, and Lucas found himself oddly grateful for Pym's presence at his side. The drone uncharacteristically quiet, as though even it understood that this particular moment didn't need commentary. When they reached the observation window, Vivian stopped walking entirely, her hand coming up to press flat against the glass, and whatever composure she'd maintained through the crane and the corridor in 2 years of searching finally, quietly, gave way. Stella was awake. She'd come back to consciousness an hour earlier, weak but lucid, propped against a stack of medical pillows with the particular irritated dignity of someone who hated being fussed over and was tolerating it anyway. When she saw her mother through the glass, something in her face that had been carefully, deliberately controlled for 2 years simply stopped controlling itself, and Lucas looked away out of something that felt less like discretion and more like the instinct to give a private moment room to exist without an audience. He gave them 20 minutes before Priya came to find him, mouth quirking in a way that suggested she'd been sent on a specific, slightly amused errand. The Queen wants to thank you, apparently in person, apparently right now. Tell her it's fine, she doesn't have to. Lucas, I have met exactly one queen in my career, and she is currently insisting, and I am not going to be the medic who tells a queen no twice in one day. He went. Vivian was sitting beside Stella's bed when he entered, one hand still resting on her daughter's arm, as though letting go even briefly might undo 2 years of effort, and she looked up at him with red eyes and an expression considerably softer than the one that had stepped off the shuttle. You found her, she said simply. My entire fleet searched this sector for 2 years. I had specialists, trackers, 3 separate intelligence networks, none of which produced anything beyond silence. And you found her on a salvage contract, rated unremarkable. I got lucky, Lucas said. Pym noticed the power signature. I almost would have skipped the compartment entirely. I would like that on the record, Pym said immediately. I noticed the power signature. I have been historically underappreciated in this narrative. Stella, propped against her pillows, looked considerably more alert than she had floating in a ruined compartment, and considerably more amused. Your drone has been complaining this entire time, hasn't it? Constantly. I do not complain, Pym said. I provide context. There is a difference, and I would appreciate it being respected. Vivian's gaze moved between them, something calculating and warm in equal measure, and when she spoke again, it was with the particular gravity of someone choosing words she intended to keep. Whatever you want, Lucas, recognition, compensation, a place within the compact if that interests you, name it. You returned to me something I had genuinely begun to fear I would never recover. Lucas thought about it, actually thought about it. The quiet, unremarkable life he'd built for himself out of reasonable pay and straightforward work. The kind of life that had, until 4 days ago, never once asked him to be more than competent and careful. He thought about the moment the compartment had opened, and the fog of vented atmosphere had cleared to reveal a stranger who'd built her own survival out of spare medical parts and sheer stubbornness, and about how completely, irreversibly his sense of what counted as an ordinary contract had been recalibrated since. "Pym could use an upgrade," he said finally. "He's been running on a processor that's older than some of the jokes he makes." "I would like to formally object to that characterization," Pym said, while also accepting the upgrade. Vivian laughed, surprised and genuine, and even Stella managed a real smile, tired but unmistakably amused, fixing Lucas with a look that suggested this was very far from the last conversation she intended to have with the man who'd cut a hole in her tomb and let 2 years of careful, lonely survival finally end. "You're going to visit," she said. "It wasn't a question. I hadn't really thought that far ahead." "Think about it now, then. I'd like to properly thank the man who didn't skip the compartment." Lucas looked at her, and at Vivian, and at Pym hovering nearby already drafting some complaint about upgrade specifications, and felt the last of the dread that had been sitting in his chest since the registry message finally loosened and let go, replaced by something unfamiliar and not at all unwelcome: the quiet, settling sense that his unremarkable life had just become considerably less unremarkable, and that for once he wasn't entirely sorry about it.